In the early hours of Saturday morning, Venezuela's capital was rocked by explosions. And now, U.S. officials are confirming a major escalation. According to CBS News, U.S. President Donald Trump ordered strikes on sites inside Venezuela, including military facilities, as Washington sharply intensified its campaign against the government of President Nicolas Maduro. Sources tell CBS News the Trump administration is aware of reports of explosions and aircraft over Caracas. But as of now, there has been no official public comment from the White House. On the ground, the situation appears chaotic. Eyewitness videos and journalist reports describe missile-like strikes, low-flying aircraft, and power outages across parts of the capital.
Hi. How are you?
Colombia's president,
Hopefully you're not at
Gustavo
war
Petro,
with them.
issued an urgent warning to the world. He said,
ice.
right now they are bombing Caracas. They are bombing with missiles. The OAS and the UN must meet immediately. The U.S. military has acknowledged reports of explosions in Caracas, but a Pentagon spokesperson refused to confirm or deny any American involvement, according to the New York Times. Witnesses reported activity at least 6 sites, including areas near Fort Tuna Army Base, La Carota Air Base, the 23 de Enero neighborhood, and in the vicinity of Miraflores Palace, the presidential residence. Venezuelan Defense Minister Diosdado Cabello's home at Fort Tuna Base was reportedly hit by shelling. Meanwhile, unverified footage circulating online shows Venezuelan forces detaining residents near the presidential palace as armored vehicles and tanks reportedly move toward the seat of power. In other videos, still unconfirmed, locals are heard screaming, "The Marines! The Marines have arrived!" Additional footage claims to show American forces storming Venezuelan ports and what appears to be U.S. Air Force strikes on Venezuelan army bases.
I believe that a few minutes before 2 a.m., at least in the part of Caracas where I live, which is downtown Caracas, and the electricity went down, and immediately explosions and aircraft noise was, I hear that. A few minutes later, I managed to dress up and go outside, and we have been reporting live since that moment.
As the videos spread, Caracas remains tense and the international community scrambling to respond. This would mark the most direct U.S. military action on Venezuelan soil in decades, following months of threats, naval deployments, and strikes tied to alleged drug trafficking networks.
It's just past 3 a.m. in Caracas, the Venezuelan capital. It's been about half an hour since we heard the latest explosions. That neighborhood of the city is now without power. That is an entire neighborhood of the city. We're still hearing drones, American jets in the air, presumably American jets in the air over the city. They're circling. They're still circling. But again, it's been quiet for about half an hour. Before that, it was explosion after explosion, dozens of blasts targeting again the western outskirts of the city. We filmed several of those explosions. It's relatively quiet now. We aren't hearing sirens or anything such, but we know that these strikes, presumably by the United States, haven't just targeted this Caracas, but also La Guaira, for example, the coastal cities, port infrastructure, the airport that serves Caracas, about 10-15 kilometers to the north of us, about a half-hour drive, again along the coast of Venezuela.
Yeah, I'm watering the birds.
Neither from the United States nor from the Venezuelan government. The day before yesterday, Venezuelans were celebrating the new year. Yesterday evening, 5 hours ago, the city was filled with families out, couples in restaurants, cafes, in parks, enjoying the night, enjoying the evening. And at 2 a.m., almost precisely, blast after blast began targeting the Venezuelan capital, the city. There's been no confirmation yet, neither from the United States or from the Venezuelan government, about what these strikes targeted, fatalities, perhaps casualties, civilians or otherwise, in the capital, to the north of the capital, along the coast. But again, American jets remain airborne over the city.
Started with one simple idea: feed pets real food. We made it fresh, we made it healthy, we made it for them. Fresh Pet, the fresh food that started it all.
الو طوارئ الهلال الاحمر رام الله الضفه الغربيه عمر معك تفضل.
Hello?
شو اسمك انتي؟
This is the exact moment when back-to-back explosions tore through the dead of the night silence in Venezuela. The night sky turned red amid the roars of fighter jets. A plume of smoke grips the skyline of Caracas, triggering fires on the hillsides. Around 2 a.m. in the morning on Saturday, low-flying aircraft were heard hovering around the Venezuelan capital, Caracas. RT News reported that Chinook helicopters were seen overhead Caracas. The footage shared by the Associated Press showed people in various neighborhoods rushed to the streets. Some could be seen in the distance from various areas of Caracas. Higuerote Airport in Venezuela's Miranda state was also reportedly attacked. Massive explosions triggering flames indicate that a military installation of Venezuela was hit. The fire suggests a strike against a surface-to-air missile launcher with the Venezuelan Air Force. Multiple explosions, flames, and smoke were seen emanating from the port of La Guaira, just to the north of Caracas. RT News footage shared smokes and fireballs emanating from the city. Another video showed non-stop explosions, triggering fears in residents. Civilians driving through Caracas reported that airstrikes erupting all around the capital city. If RT News reports are to be believed, the entire U.S. Air Force cut transponders during the attack. It is a vital electronic device that automatically replies to radar signals from air traffic control, ATC, or other aircraft. A U.S. Stratotanker reportedly refueled strike fighters to bomb Venezuela. Reports say the U.S. military hit Venezuelan defense headquarters. Explosions and smoke can be seen near Fort Tiuna, which is home to the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense. This video reportedly suggests that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his troops fled the presidential palace and defense ministry. Panic and chaos erupting on the streets of Caracas following the strikes can also be seen.
Country. It remains unclear if this was a negotiated exit. We are told by Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who says he has spoken with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that the explosions, the kinetic action as he describes it, the military strikes there were done to protect the efforts on the ground to execute what the Republican senator says was an arrest warrant to pick up Maduro and ultimately his wife when they were taken out of the country. We have asked the White House and the Pentagon and frankly the Justice Department for any better details about where Maduro is right now, but that capture operation that we have now learned about better explains why there were low-flying helicopters hovering on the ground in and around Caracas in the early morning hours. Today, we have spoken to one of our colleagues, a journalist on the ground in Venezuela, who was effectively stunned into silence when she heard this news. You could almost see her shaking during a live conversation we had here earlier. Richard Engel, again, is our chief foreign correspondent. Richard, as you look at this new picture, a live picture at what is roughly 7 o'clock in the morning in Caracas, Venezuela, it is clear that the situation has now calmed down, at least as you can see from the sky here, though it's very unclear about the situation on the ground there right now, who in effect is filling that power vacuum. Marco Rubio, we are told, according to Mike Lee, again, the Republican senator from Utah, saying that there was no further action in Venezuela expected to take place today. So it appears that the strikes we saw overnight are, at least for now, the last ones. There were roughly 15,000 American troops, soldiers, and sailors who have been stationed in what the president has described as a massive armada off the coast there in the Caribbean, off the coast of Venezuela, as part of this pressure campaign. The president himself, only a matter of days ago, said that basically Maduro's days were numbered. We know that he and Maduro, the President Maduro, had spoken about a month ago. No better indications whether he and Maduro had spoken more recently than that, or if there were some private negotiations taking place behind the scenes, as evidenced by this being a capture operation. It appears that that nothing would have been formalized if it still required his capture. Among the questions to be asked of the president a short time from now, we have heard on the ground from members of that narco-terrorist regime, as the White House describes it, what was formerly the Maduro regime, asking for proof of life of Maduro. Members of the military establishment there saying in effect that they were prepared to fight back with force if U.S. troops were on the ground in that country. No indication that the president has any plans to do such a thing. And then, of course, politically, there is a lot of the back and forth taking place, even if this early morning hour, about exactly what the president's mission was, the authority under which he was acting and doing this right now amid what has been a very broad criticism, frankly, some of it from Republicans as well, certainly from Democrats, about what have included a series of boat strikes in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, focused largely on what the U.S. alleges are drug boats bringing drugs to the United States. Our team is in the control room, keeping us honest on who we can speak to right now. Richard Engel has been joining us. Keir Simmons has been joining us as well. I want to get back to Courtney Kuby, who covers the Pentagon for us and is an expert in all of these matters. Courtney, if you hear me right now, I want to get a better sense of what you're learning about what more we may know about what went into this capture operation this morning under the veil of darkness. It happened quickly, it appears, in only a matter of hours' time before the first reports of explosions, and then us learning that Maduro himself had been captured only a couple of hours later.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, there's a few things about this operation that frankly are just confounding to me so far. And I'm hoping that we get more details, especially if we have this event with down at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump and potentially other Trump administration officials. Hopefully they'll take some questions and give us some actual detail, the real facts of what went on here. Some of the things that are surprising to me is the U.S. military would rarely carry out an operation like this on a night with a full moon or with a large moon. They like to do things, again, going back to things like the Bin Laden raid or some of these well-known military operations in recent, they like to do it under the cover of as much darkness as possible. There's a pretty full moon out there, so that's a little surprising. I know that this sounds strange, but things like weather really do factor into the planning of these sorts of operations. So not just that. The tweet from Senator Mike Lee that you read a little bit earlier, where he talked about how Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio called him and explained that the president carried this out under his Article 2 authorities under the Constitution. Well, that is his executive authorities as President of the United States. And Senator Lee specifically saying that it was because it was to protect the American people. So it appears, based off of that tweet from Senator Lee, that in fact this is similar to the legal justification that the military has been using for the strikes against the drug boats, and that is that the drugs on those boats present a direct threat to the American people, and so for that reason there is a legal or a lawful reason to carry out a military attack on those boats. Now, of course, that has been up for dispute. There's been a lot of talk of that over recent weeks and months. The big difference here, though, is if they are using that same justification not only for carrying out these strikes inside of Caracas, inside of Venezuela, targeting what appear to be a lot of Venezuelan military locations, but also using that as the justification for potentially using the U.S. military to detain Nicolas Maduro and his wife. I mean, that is pretty astonishing. Those are the kinds of things that I'm really hoping to get more answers to. And then more than that, we are starting to see some detail about some of the locations that were struck by the U.S. military. Here again, they appear to be at least one port, some military installations. Why did they target those specific locations? Now, most likely, when we talked in the last hour about shaping, and that would be in advance of especially any kind of an operation where you may have U.S. military on the ground or any kind of U.S. officials, law enforcement, whatever it is, on the ground, you would want to sort of shape the battlefield. So that would include things like taking out any kind of potential air defenses, maybe jamming potential air defenses. Even we've seen some of the capabilities in the region recently that could do that could actually carry that out. But they would want to do whatever they can to make the mission go smoothly. So take on any potential barriers or threats to the U.S. personnel who are on the ground there. Is that why they struck those locations? Or were there other strategic reasons for why they struck those locations? These are all the kinds of questions that we're hoping to get answers to. And then also, there's just the questions that we've been talking about, the legality of this. Nicolas Maduro, of course, was indicted 5+ years ago now in the United States for allegations of being involved in drug trafficking, narco trafficking. We have heard from President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, from others saying that he's the illegitimate leader here. But what was the real legal justification for doing this, and under what authorities did they do so? One thing that I'm really going to be asking about in the coming days, we have not been getting a whole lot of fidelity on military operations in recent months, but one thing I will really be asking about is under what authorities were the U.S. military there? So in other words, were they there under a Title 50 authority, meaning were they under U.S. intelligence umbrella when they were involved in these operations? These are all the kinds of wonky, I'll admit it, questions that we have right now, but that I think that will ultimately paint a real picture of exactly how long the planning has gone into this, what the justification was here, and then what ultimately the longer term goal may be for removing Nicolas Maduro from power.
Yeah, not wonky, but significant questions. We're going to be asking the president, likely to be the first to face those questions in a matter of hours from now as he addresses reporters and the country, frankly the world, at roughly 11 o'clock today. Courtney, again, to the points you were making about the actions that we have seen early this morning, the military strikes from the Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who is our best source because he made it public, and he says he spoke to Marco Rubio. He said that the strikes we saw overnight were deployed to protect and defend those executing this arrest warrant. As he says, the girl was arrested, according to Rubio, by U.S. personnel to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States, presumably based on that indictment that dates back to March of 2020. I want to get to Colonel Steve Warren, our NBC News military analyst who's been watching this with me as well. And Colonel, I'm struck by a couple of things. One, by what we have witnessed this morning, the dramatic and historic developments taking place. And two, by where this fits into history. It was on this day, January 3rd of 1990, that Panama's General Manuel Noriega, after holding up for 10 days in the Vatican embassy, I think it was in Panama City, surrendered to U.S. military troops to face charges of drug trafficking as well. 36 years to the day since that took place, and now in a lot of different ways, history repeats itself. The question is, what does history look like from here? What does the U.S. do about it in these days and weeks ahead? But specific to what has happened in these overnight hours, talk to us about those challenges that the American Special Forces would have faced in this capture operation. And of course, what all would agree is good news is that at least at this point it appears that there were no casualties on the U.S. side, at least those that we have learned about in the carrying out of this action.
Well, it's really good news that up till now we've received no reports of American casualties, and that's something we're grateful and thankful for. It's an extraordinary operation. Operations like this are much more complex, I think, than they look. And that's what great professionals do. They make it look easy. And these are really the world's most elite commandos, the Tier 1 Special Operations Forces out of the Joint Special Operations Command, often called JSOC. We don't know if this was Delta Force or SEAL Team 6, so we can refer to it simply as the Tier 1 Special Forces Operations. Exceptional mission supported by air defense suppression, special forces operators, and then, of course, some level of law enforcement who also participated in this arrest. So it's an exceptional mission, so many complications. Courtney Cubey, our Pentagon correspondent, touched on some of the requirements to shape the battlefield ahead of penetrating into the target area with the forces that would actually conduct the arrest. I think some of these explosions that we're seeing in various spots, I think we have to keep in mind that while we want to suppress the enemy's air defense capabilities, what we also want to do is prevent any quick reaction forces from moving in as the helicopters arrive. So my instinct is that many of these strikes would have been the ability for the Venezuelan forces to communicate with each other, so some sort of communication node, and then the ability for the Venezuelan forces to respond. So if there are Venezuelan quick reaction forces, they might well have been targeted. If there were Venezuelan police who could potentially respond, they might well have been targeted. So I think that's what we're looking at. Normally we suppress air defense. We isolate the target area, which is what I was just talking about, cut off any routes in that responders can use. Then we secure the area, so that's the most immediate area, the building or the car or wherever Maduro was at the time. That's that close-in security, just really a circle around that spot that we were trying to conduct the arrest, and then the exfiltration.
Colonel Warren, just for a better understanding of this, and obviously there's a lot to be determined, whether this was some form of a negotiated exit, how all of this played out. It appears by the president's language that this was, in effect, a capture operation, that this was not agreed to by Maduro, but we'll wait to see more details about that. Would there be, in a situation like this, any form of communication between the U.S. forces there and any of the regime, the leadership on the ground as this is taking place, or do they just... is it just a whirlwind, they whisk in and then depart?
Either one is possible. It would make sense to try to establish some sort of communications with the security forces there and tell them, hey, listen, don't make a mistake you'll regret, right? That would make sense. But I have to tell you, the way this operation was conducted, and given our history with the Venezuelans, my instinct is this was probably, as you described, really sort of a surprise whirlwind assault. If it were negotiated, there seems to be a lot of fire and flame and explosions for a negotiation to me. So I feel like this one, my instinct tells me that this one is probably much more of a surprise attack, a very precise shock attack or raid. Really, it's more doctrinally, we call this a raid because you're just in and out. But I think that's probably what we're looking at here.
And it does raise real questions about if this was not a negotiated exit, how the U.S. knew exactly where Nicolas Maduro, and in this case his wife, were at the time, specifically where they were collected from, where they were picked up from. Again, among the questions that we're going to be asking, just 6:20 in the morning, and it feels like we are well into 2026. This is a storyline and an operation that is going to drive a lot of the conversation. in Washington, around the country, and around not just the Western Hemisphere, but the world for the foreseeable future. Colonel Steve Warren, thank you so much to you. My colleague Julie Sirkin is on the ground for us in West Palm Beach this morning. She has been traveling with the president, has been there for much of this holiday break for him, but it's clear that in between some of the festivities are seeing him around Christmas and New Year's, that the president, who was took photographs yesterday with Stephen Miller, Marco Rubio, among others, has been privately very focused on this right now. Julie, we know that news conference will take place at 11 o'clock this morning, a matter of hours from now. Pull back the curtain for us on what we have heard from the president and how we've sort of been building up to this moment.
Well, he's been building up to this moment, Peter, in the way that Richard and Keir and Courtney have laid out over the last 6 months, ramping up pressure, his cabinet ramping up military pressure in the seizure of those oil tankers. This week, a couple of days ago, we saw economic sanctions on that oil taking place by the administration, different boat seizures as well that we've been tracking closely, even during the holiday break. And just peel back the curtain even further and put my Capitol Hill hat on. When I covered Marco Rubio as a senator, Venezuela was a top focus of his even then. He had often spoken out against Nicolas Maduro. He had been very present, tip of the spear on matters when he was a senator, when he was in Congress, trying to make sure that the U.S. had an aggressive policy and posture on rooting out the narco state, as he called it there in Venezuela, and then now transitioning to Secretary of State. When I talk to officials close to him and close to the administration, this has been a priority of his, not just the president's, but the Secretary of State's, since this administration, this second term, took shape earlier this year. And when you talk about Rubio, a couple of weeks ago, he was giving comments and remarks in his final press conference before the end of the year, and he was asked if there was a possibility of some kind of negotiation, a deal with Maduro to avoid this kind of action, perhaps on limiting the flow of drugs that we've seen the administration use as their excuse, as their cudgel to pursue this military action. And Rubio said even then that Maduro cannot be trusted, that he has fallen through and broken deals and promises in the past, and they cannot make that kind of agreement with him. And that brings us to, in many ways, this moment that we're seeing now. And when you heard from Courtney laying out what she called those wonky questions, what we have called the right questions, when you look at what Congress is going to be asking, the very basics of this is that Article 1 gives Congress the authority, the sole authority to conduct, to declare war, to have that power, the War Powers Act that you heard Mike Lee there, the Republican, who, by the way, is a constitutional lawyer himself. He's often been concerned about these matters. And then Article 2 gives the president the power to act if there is a direct or imminent threat, which is what we've heard apparently from Mike Lee as he laid out the justification after he heard from Marco Rubio. So where does this go from here? I was struck, Peter, as well, a couple of weeks ago when Congress received their briefing from administration officials. Pete Hegseth was there, the Secretary of Defense, Marco Rubio was there, and the one question that lawmakers, even Republican allies of the president, like Lindsey Graham, for example, had asked the officials in the room behind closed doors, what does this look like from Maduro? You are going after these oil tankers, you are intercepting these drug boats that you say are carrying drugs that could harm the American people, but what about Nicolas Maduro? And it is even in that room a couple of weeks ago, Peter, that lawmakers in a classified setting couldn't get answers. Lindsey Graham told me, for example, after that briefing, Peter, that he asked point blank, is it regime change that you are pursuing? Do you want to take Maduro down? To be clear, Graham and other Republicans thought that the administration should take this step, but it is not an answer, Peter, that they received in that room. And now as Congress heads back to Washington after this holiday break, that is the question that Democrats, that Republicans are going to be asking. But so far, for most Republicans, praise of this administration. When it comes to the president, what's next? He will deliver that news conference in a couple of hours from now. He
He said, too, in an interview with the New York Times earlier this morning that he plans to answer the question of what authority the administration had and what their plans are next for Maduro. Peter.
Julie Surkin, thank you so much for your expert knowledge of the situation on the Hill as it relates to those lawmakers. I want to add one thing to this conversation right now, and you can see how the criticism of the president's actions is already developing even before dawn here, or I'm stuck in a building, so I can't even tell. I guess it is now dawn in the United States. We've been covering this since the pre-dawn hours early this morning. The criticism focuses on a variety of things. The president has made clear that his concern, his focus on Venezuela, the illegitimate leader, as the president describes it, focuses on Maduro's drug trafficking, his role in that effort. But obviously, there has also been criticism that a matter of weeks ago, just over a month ago, the president pardoned the former Honduran president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been convicted on drug trafficking charges. So you can see, even at this early morning hour, how some of the criticism is developing, questions about the authority under which the president was acting, questions about what the president's critics, many of them Democrats, view as sort of a disconnect in terms of the efforts taking place. But the president is touting the success of what has happened as we begin a new dawn and truly a new day in that country of Venezuela. The president speaking, as you noted, to the New York Times early this morning, saying, among other things, in a quick phone conversation that the Times reports that, quote, a lot of good planning and a lot of great troops and great people were involved in this. He says it was a brilliant operation. Actually, we will hear from him again shortly. It obviously comes with a ripple effect. The fallout not unique to Venezuela, but to the region around it as well. We are now hearing from the Colombian president in neighboring Colombia, President Petro there, saying that its forces will be deployed to the Venezuelan border and that they are preparing for refugees. This was in the form of a post. So, as we have talked about, one of our experts overnight telling us that as many as 8 million Venezuelans have fled that country over the course of the last series of years amid their concerns about the authoritarian government, concerns about inflation, and broad human rights concerns that have existed there as well. We are, though, hearing from the Venezuelan regime, members of what now appears to be the decapitated regime, the country's vice president this morning on state-run television saying after the President Trump's announcement that Nicolas Maduro's location remained unknown to her and asked that President Trump provide proof of life. It's a good question. We do not know where Maduro is at this time. We do know, according to lawmakers that have spoken to Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, that he is expected to face justice, as they describe it, for criminal charges against him.
This is an NBC News special report.
Alexander here in New York with a dramatic developing situation taking place on the ground in Caracas, Venezuela. We have been watching the situation develop over the course of the last several hours, bringing you live coverage after a large scale strike on the ground there with fiery explosions seen throughout the city. And then from the president, we heard only a short time ago, President Trump on Truth Social posting the following in a stunning and dramatic development, saying the United States of America has successfully carried out a large scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who President Trump says has been, along with his wife, captured. He says he has been captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done, the president says, in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. He says details to follow, announcing a news conference to take place at 11 o'clock this morning, roughly 5.5 hours from now at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Right now, you are looking at a live picture. There is the president's post on social media. But let's show you again that live picture on the ground of a more calm, at least from the sky, situation in Venezuela. Now dawn breaking above the capital city there, and it is a new dawn for that country without Maduro, who the U.S. had accused for months of being an illegitimate leader, saying that he was the head of a narco-terrorist regime. He is no longer in power. Real questions right now about who is governing that country. Will it take one of two different forks in the road? Will it be a country that is governed by a new Democratic-led government, or will it be one that continues to follow the path of Nicolas Maduro? We have a series of questions that have yet to be answered. We have reached out to those at the White House, the Pentagon, and State Department for some answers to those questions, including where is Nicolas Maduro right now? Where is he being taken? Will he face justice, as it were, in a U.S. court of law in the United States? Was this a negotiated exit? We do not know about that just yet as well. Maduro, only a matter of days ago, had told a Spanish journalist that he was open to conversations with the United States. The president himself has said publicly that the focus has been on ending the illegal flow of drugs from Venezuela into the U.S. The president says it's fentanyl. Experts in that region say most often Venezuela is responsible for the flow of cocaine, notably to Europe, but some of it gets to the United States, of course, as well. We are also trying to get new details about the operation that has taken place on the ground. But as we look at some of the video from earlier in the distance, you can see some of the glowing lights, the fiery explosions that had taken place. We know that there were low-flying helicopters reported by eyewitnesses on the ground as well that likely would have been needed to be a part of any operation of this kind. Not a kill operation like the one involving Osama bin Laden more than a decade ago. This a capture operation that ultimately picked up Nicolas Maduro. We are joined by some of our best in the business, our colleagues Richard Engel, Courtney Kuby at the Pentagon, our chief international correspondent Keir Simmons, and Gabe Gutierrez, who covers the White House with me as well. Let's begin with Richard Engel, if we can, for a moment. Richard, I just want to reset the situation, get your reaction to the headline this morning as you and I were on the air. As I read that post out loud, both of us were stunned by the announcement that Maduro had been captured and taken out of the country.
So the first indication we got that something dramatic had happened was several hours ago. We've been on air for several hours now, Peter, when we heard these vague reports, still unconfirmed, of explosions in Caracas and in potential other areas. And then a key detail emerged: helicopters. Witnesses described helicopters on the ground, hovering, sounds of aircraft, explosions in multiple locations. As soon as you start hearing helicopters hovering, you get an indication that this is an extraction operation. You obviously can't land fixed-winged aircraft in the middle of a city. But who was the target? What happened? Who was carrying it out? And then a short while we were discussing all of these scenarios, President Trump himself, and by no accident, President Trump himself, the Pentagon has been silent. So up until now, this is something of a pattern where major announcements are made by President Trump personally on Truth Social. President Trump announced that it was Nicolas Maduro and his wife who had been captured, and that they will face justice, and thank you for your attention to this matter. The question that everyone is asking right now is, did the United States, did President Trump just carry out a successful regime change? Because regime change has just happened, and will this open the door to a democratic opposition, better economic relations, a weakening of an alliance backed by Cuban intelligence all across the region, a new Latin America where the U.S. has a much stronger hand? Or did tonight President Trump just send Venezuela into uncertain territory for sure, but civil war and a power struggle that the United States will have to either watch from afar or be drawn in to try and contain?
Richard, I apologize for my interruption. I only want to share some new information that I received while you were speaking there. This is coming from the Republican Senator of Utah, Mike Lee, who had spoken only a matter of hours ago, as we shared during our live coverage, criticizing this, asking how and what constitutional act was taking place where the Congress had not been notified of this. Mike Lee has now posted a new statement where he says he just spoke to the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. He says that Rubio informed him that Nicolas Maduro has been arrested by U.S. personnel to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States, and that the kinetic action, the strikes that we saw tonight in effect, was deployed to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrant. So that this was the primary mission, the strikes, in the words of Mike Lee, detailing what he was told by the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that those strikes were basically to help protect those who were executing this arrest warrant. This action, Lee adds, likely falls within the president's inherent authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect U.S. personnel from an actual or imminent attack. Now, the lawmakers will, of course, fight over the circumstances behind this, how this is being conducted, but let's focus again on what we know is happening right now with our senior national security correspondent, Courtney Kuby, who is up early as we begin this new year together. Courtney, again, the major headline there, the capture of Nicolas Maduro and the successful carrying out of this large-scale strike against Venezuela. What are your sources telling you? Do we have any better understanding of who would have been behind this effort? Obviously, it requires some of the special forces type units to be able to accomplish a mission of this kind.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we need to keep in mind here, Peter, is the U.S. military, when it's come to some of these recent actions in the region, so specifically the interdictions of these oil tankers, the military has been in support of law enforcement here. Based off of the way the president posted this on Truth Social, his own social media platform, of course, that he started, based on the way that he wrote about this, it does appear that this was law enforcement that was in the lead here. We're still trying to get more information about that. The U.S. military, though, it appears was involved in sort of shaping the locations so that the law enforcement and potentially other U.S. agencies would be able to go in.
Sorry, Courtney, please continue.
Would be able to go in and sort of clear the space so that they could go in and then arrest Nicolas Maduro and his wife or take them into custody. So the kinds of things that we are seeing from social media video, as we know, we've seen the statement from the president, but that's really all the detail that we're getting. The video does appear to show transport helicopters, Chinooks, but there also appear to be some smaller helicopters there. Now, we don't know what those are, but we do know what is in the region right now. There is a very elite Air Force unit known as the 160th Special Operations. You may have heard of them because they were involved in taking the Navy SEALs into bin Laden's compound in May of 2011. They have assets there, including Little Birds, so these tiny little helicopters that move very fast, fly low to the ground. So we know that those sorts of assets are in the area that could have been used here. But I also found it very interesting that President Trump didn't specifically refer to the strikes that occurred as sort of the shaping operations in advance of the U.S. personnel going in on the ground there. He didn't necessarily refer to those as airstrikes. And remember some other assets the U.S. has built up. Remember, over the last couple of months, the military has flooded that region with a ton of air power and power at sea. Power at sea is the key here. clear. They have a number of different ships who have the ability to launch Tomahawks, TLAMs. Those are very precise missiles. We have seen the U.S. military launch them in recent years in many different cases, so many cases, Libya, Syria, other times, where they need to hit a specific target and they need what's known as standoff capability. So essentially they want to be free or safe from any kind of air defenses or other systems in the area that they are trying to target. So at this point, it's not clear exactly what the Venezuelan military may have done in response to any of this. We have not seen any indication that there was any kind of immediate response when the aircraft were going or when these strikes were occurring. But remember another thing that the military has been doing in recent weeks and months now, and that is flying missions close to the airspace that would become Venezuelan airspace. So right up to the border of international airspace, international waters, right up to the border of Venezuela. A lot of times the military will do that for a reason. It's not just testing routes. It's not just seeing what they can see. It's trying to figure out exactly what the air defense is in a place, how they respond to an aircraft. So it's known as painting an aircraft. Does the air defenses that are potentially lined up along the border there of Venezuela, are they latching onto U.S. military aircraft when they fly up close to Venezuelan airspace? This would give the military, over the course of the last several weeks when we've seen them do this time and time again, even with things like long-range bombers, or the Venezuelan air defenses painting those aircraft, how quickly do they respond? This gives the military, the U.S. military, essentially a pattern of life of how the Venezuelan military would respond to aircraft flying in. So all of these things that we have seen occur over the last several weeks and months with the military, the buildup, the exercises, the routines that they have been flying, what they have been doing, it appears that it's all been building up to this, Peter. But the big question that we still don't have a good answer to is, beyond the strikes and beyond what appears to be providing a lift to law enforcement and other U.S. officials as part of this picking up Maduro and his wife, what other component, what other part did the U.S. military play? And so we just don't have an answer to that at this point, Peter.
Courtney Kuby covers the Pentagon for us right now. I want to share some other information while you, Courtney, have been speaking. Again, as we're monitoring the situation there, as we try to get a better understanding of Nicolas Maduro's whereabouts and the evolving situation there. The New York Times posting a short time ago that it has spoken to President Trump early this morning, where in its words, it celebrated the success of the mission to capture the Venezuelan president. They quote President Trump saying, "A lot of good planning and a lot of great troops and great people," he said. He said it was a brilliant operation, actually. The Times asked him if he had sought congressional authority for the operation or what is next for Venezuela. And when asked that question, the president said he would address those matters during a news conference to take place at Mar-a-Lago this morning, his private club there in Florida. The president announcing earlier that would take place at roughly 11 a.m. Eastern time. We should also tell you that Venezuela's vice president there has spoken on state-run television after the president's post this morning saying that Nicolas Maduro's location was unknown and that she was asking President Trump for proof of life. Again, it raises real questions about the governance of that country in this time with what the president describes as a massive armada of 15,000 American troops, forces off the coast of that country. I want to bring in now the NBC News military analyst, Colonel Steve Warren, who is joining us this morning. Colonel Warren, Happy New Year. We are off to the races as we begin this new year again. The president wasting no time at the start of the year in his pressure campaign against Nicolas Maduro, ultimately, as he said this morning, capturing him and his wife, taking them out of the country. Unclear if this was a negotiated exit, but as the Republican Senator Mike Lee said, the strikes that we saw early this morning were done in effect to protect the executing of that arrest warrant, the effort by those forces to pick him up. I know you haven't been involved, obviously, in what's taking place there, but give us a sense about how something like this would be conducted conducted, how challenging it is, and what considerations would have gone into place in advance of a dramatic capture operation like this?
Peter, often our more elite, what we call the Tier 1, so this is our most elite special forces, often our Tier 1 special forces will operate in conjunction with many other agencies throughout the government, whether it's the CIA, as we may likely have seen in that initial potential ground strike, that first ground strike we saw several days ago, or often law enforcement agencies. It is not uncommon for the Tier 1 special operators to work with law enforcement agencies. Particularly, we did this, I think, fairly regularly during the Iraq-Afghanistan conflict. So our special forces operations and our more elite law enforcement operators are familiar with working with each other. Now, as far as how an operation like this comes together, it's an extraordinary and complicated thing to do, and real praise to our soldiers and sailors and law enforcement officials who were able to pull this off. So far, we haven't received any reports of U.S. casualties, which is an extraordinary thing, and we're really proud of our men and women who executed it. But it takes there's sort of several layers, and Courtney Cubie referenced it a little bit just moments ago. Initially, you have to ensure that you have the ability to get our aircraft into the target area without being shot down. So we have to execute what we call the suppression of enemy air defenses. So that could be some of the early explosions that we saw, as Courtney mentioned. As our correspondent Courtney Cubie mentioned, possibly the use of Tomahawks or other remote capabilities to damage or destroy air defense radars and air defense launchers, right? So that's the initial execution. The next thing we like to try and do is isolate. So once we've suppressed air defense, we then try to isolate the target area. In this case, apparently we somehow knew where Nicolas Maduro and his wife were. It's unclear whether that was because we had spoken with them. We don't know how we knew this, but somehow we knew where Maduro may well have been, and we isolated that area. That can be done, again, through remote capabilities, or it could be done with actual troops on the ground to provide what we call security. And then finally, special forces operators, along most likely with some sort of federal law enforcement, whether it's a marshal or FBI. At this point, we don't know. But after suppression of air defense, isolation of the objective area, finally, we move in and arrest the individual that we're looking for.
Colonel Warren, I want to get a better understanding, of this. Obviously, it would require some troops to touch the ground to be able to pick up Nicolas Maduro in the first place here. Obviously, 15,000 troops is not enough to secure a country like that. The president has made no indication that ground troops will be going into Venezuela in any meaningful way right now. But what sort of a challenge does this pose for the United States? This ultimately becomes less a military one, but more a diplomatic one to try to, allow that country to take the preferred fork in the road, not to return to a sort of authoritarian type regime or leader, but to focus on a more democratic led government right now. Ultimately, these are the early steps that you watch militarily, and then there are other real challenges that begin.
Some would say that these steps that we've done up until now, frankly, are the easy steps, right? We have exceptional special operators, exceptional law enforcement operators who understand how to do these types of missions, but they happen at the speed of violence very, very quickly. A lot of planning obviously went into it, but the execution happens very, very quickly. Now comes what in some people's opinions would be the very, very hard part. And we've seen this before. We saw this in Afghanistan beginning in, after 9/11. We saw this in Iraq when a regime is toppled, when a regime changes suddenly, there's a vacuum. Now there's a little bit of a vacuum. Who's in charge? Who's running the country? We don't know this. Neither does anyone in Venezuela, it would appear, know this. So there are, of course, as in any country, there are opposing forces. There are different forces who want to be in power. Where is the military internally going to fall on this? Where are the other power centers in Venezuela going to fall on this? Where are the other legitimate and somewhat powerful drug cartels who are operating in that country, as we've talked about, as the president has talked about? Those cartels are still functioning. We've struck some of their boats. But that's about it. So these cartels are still there. They're still strong. They're still functioning. The military, we have not, unlike what we did in Afghanistan or what we did in Iraq, we have not, frankly, inflicted any significant damage on the Venezuelan military. So what are they going to do now is certainly a question, I think, on everyone's mind.
Colonel Steve Warren is an NBC News military analyst. Colonel Warren, we appreciate your expertise in helping us better understand the situation that's still evolving on the ground there in Caracas, Venezuela. As again, hopefully we can put up another picture to show our viewers the situation there. It's a new day, a new dawn in many ways, and it's one that begins without the longtime president of that country, the authoritarian leader Nicolas Maduro, who's now been captured and taken out of the country alongside his wife, according to the president, by U.S. forces. I want to get to our chief foreign correspondent again, Richard Engel, who's been watching this news developing right now. Richard, among the questions that the president will surely be asked at a news conference to take place about 5 hours from now at Mar-a-Lago is whether he had any conversations with Maduro in recent days. Maduro told a Spanish journalist only a couple of days ago that he was open to, in effect, discussions, conversations, perhaps even negotiations with the United States. We wait for those answers. We wait to learn where Maduro is right now. But it also raises real questions about what happens next in that country and what it does in terms of the president's desire to sort of crack down on that narco-terrorist state, with so much of the regime still, as evidenced by the public statements coming out of the country, remaining in effect, whether in power, certainly in its positions, though it's unclear who really is in power there.
This is a regime change operation. The government has been decapitated. There clearly was a degree of coordination, unclear with Maduro himself. Not full coordination with Maduro himself. If he wanted to, he could have fled the country. He could have gone to a friendly country. He has some good personal relations with the president of Turkey. He has decent relations with Russia. He's had good relations with Cuba or even Colombia. There are places where if he had wanted to go, he could have gone. So this clearly wasn't a surrender. This was a capture. And as we talked about earlier, this helicopter extraction was supported by a military operation, whether it was tomahawks or airstrikes or a combination of both. There was suppressive fire used to protect U.S. personnel during this extraction operation. Now, as you talked earlier about this may be the easy part. Of course, it's not easy. Only a few countries in the world, perhaps only the United States, has this kind of capability. But now, who is going to run the country? Was this President Trump's perhaps greatest military accomplishment? A bloodless regime change operation against an illegitimate dictator who ran a mafia state? If there's a successful, quick democratic transition and the legitimate opposition, which won the last elections, which were then stolen from them, if they are able to come into power, work out a working relationship with the existing Venezuelan military, then this will be a great success. If, however, the military divides, a new strong man who has potentially anti-United States, emerges in power, the country descends into civil war, then this will be perhaps President Trump's greatest failure. He clearly is hoping for the latter, and I know a lot of back-channel negotiations have been involved in this. I've been talking to some of the negotiators who were working with Trump administration officials. And there are many Trump administration officials who have interests here. President Trump's interest, as he's made clear, was always the drugs, to stop the drug trade, and he's interested in Venezuela's oil. He's made that clear. Venezuela has enormous oil reserves, and he was critical when the United States went into Iraq that the United States didn't take the oil. Marco Rubio himself, coming up in Latin American politics, anti-Cuban platform, has an interest in regime change in Venezuela, which he hopes will then weaken an alliance of states that are anti-American in Latin America, including Cuba and Venezuela being the largest. You mentioned Miller, who has an immigration agenda, would want fewer migrants coming out of Venezuela, potentially Venezuela becoming a place where migrants can go. So this is a new day for Latin America.
Right.
And the U.S. military carried an operation. We're going to hear a lot about it, how successful it was, but this is a new day for the U.S. relations in Latin America, with President Trump asserting dominance and doing a snatch and grab operation. Will this encourage other leaders around the world to do the same with their enemies, and will it make the United States, which in theory defends democracy and human rights, seem hypocritical?
You've been listening to Richard Engel, our chief foreign correspondent. Richard, you were talking with me about the oil reserves in Venezuela. Their reserves, number one, the largest in the world, believed to be roughly 300 billion barrels by some assessments, accounting for approaching 20% of the global supply there in Venezuela. You'll remember after the U.S. recently seized one of the sanctioned oil tankers, as the White House described it, the president said that it was his belief that the U.S. would then seize that oil, would keep that oil. That tanker was then routed to the United States, specifically to Texas. Keir Simmons is our chief international correspondent. He's been watching this developing news with us as well. And Keir, quickly to you, I want to share a statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry. Vladimir Putin's the Kremlin now reacting to this, saying that the United States committed, in its words, an act of armed aggression against Venezuela that it said was both deeply concerning and condemnable. That is notable because while on the one hand the U.S. has been focused heavily in this region on Venezuela, the president and his team simultaneously have been focused on trying to bring about an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, for a variety of reasons over the course of many months, has been disinclined, it appears, to resolve the situation there. We have heard from Volodymyr Zelensky, who has also been very reluctant to give up land in that country, but this does infuse a new wrinkle into another global hotspot, which is Russia as well.
Yeah, I've been reading that statement too, Peter, and I've been reflecting that this is why Richard Engel describes this as such a significant moment, is that what you have overnight is the U.S. striking a Russian partner. Maduro was, a de facto ally of President Putin, and President Trump has just taken him out. So you have that aspect, and on the other hand, you have President Putin now offering his diplomacy, if you like, to try to stabilize the situation. Effectively, you have President Putin saying, okay, we have a problem in your region, Mr. Trump, let me help you to solve that. Sounds familiar, and it is therefore significant because it gives the Russians the ability to kind of say, well, look, you see, this happens everywhere, and we help each other to solve it. So you can see how there are multiple dimensions to this, and the implications and the impact of it, we will only know in the months ahead. But there's another aspect to this too, Peter, and I think it's really fascinating, and people will be talking about this again as we look ahead, is that what you have here is very familiar, which is the U.S. intervening in another country to potentially bring about, you might even say, and the Trump administration isn't saying this clearly, and there's a reason why perhaps they're not quite saying it this way, but maybe even to try and bring about democracy, but certainly intervening. And that is something that we have seen before from the U.S., and Richard has been very carefully navigating those questions over whether it really works. And there is plenty of history to suggest that it does not, and then there are some examples of moments when it has made a difference. And all of this is happening while there are protests in Iran effectively looking to overthrow the regime there. And those protests are the most significant since some years ago, the uprising over the killing of a young woman in Iran. So there, too, there is a threat to that regime. And, of course, Iran is a close partner to Venezuela. So this is, there are moving parts here, and there is no doubt of this significance.
You're right, Keir. In the president's victory speech upon winning the last election, he said, "I'm not going to start wars, I'm going to stop wars." We're now hearing some of the criticism coming in from some of the president's political opponents. Among them, we're hearing from one of the top national security officials who served beneath President Obama during his time in office. That's Ben Rhodes, who says, in simple terms, he says, a regime change war in Latin America based on absurd rationales about drug trafficking, no explanation of goals, and counter to everything Trump promised, campaigning, and we're not even a full year into Trump's turn. See what the domestic criticism will be of the actions taking place. Richard Engel, quickly to you, there are still, even as we watch what appears to be a successful capture operation, there is still a lot of potential complications in the days, and weeks ahead.
Huge complications. Doing a successful military extraction, like a successful counter-terrorism strike, is something that President Trump will talk about. He will praise the bravery of the soldiers. He will talk about how it was carried out with great expertise and precision and coordination, and it seems that it was. But who will govern the country? How will it run? Will the people accept it? All very open questions. And I wanted to go back for a second to ask Keir a question, if I may, because we heard that statement. I heard it live on this conversation from the Kremlin. And one thing that struck me is it didn't seem to be that strong. I've heard the Kremlin, when it wants to condemn them, use much stronger terms. This described it as it's condemnable. It wasn't very, I don't want to say emphatic. Do you think in a way that this kind of operation, a regime change operation, which is what the President Trump just did, could even help Vladimir Putin, could help him justify the war in Ukraine, and it could help him reestablish what used to be called the sphere of influence world during the Cold War, where the United States controls its neighborhood and Russia dominated its pace. Could this actually help Putin? Is he secretly...
Good. Yeah, Richard, I think you ask a great question, and I think that, again, it's multi-layered. So, on the one hand, yes, you can see in that statement from the Kremlin Kremlin, from President Putin, that he is trying to position himself to be the diplomat, that it's not in many ways a full condemnation, although it does, as you say, use the word condemnable. There is that aspect. And on the other hand, Richard, this is in Venezuela, this is a partner of Russia, a close ally, if you like. And you've seen in the years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, President Putin lose partners, and not least, of course, and you were there to see it, Richard, President Assad of Syria falling. So historians may look back on this and see it as the slow weakening of Russia's power, despite the connection between President Trump and President Putin, the personal connection. This may be seen in the future as another brick in the wall, if you like, for Russia's global capability and global standing. But clearly, President Putin is battling to overcome that view, and Putin will know, and let's just say that Putin has been in power for long enough to have been around for the invasion of Iraq and to have said that should not happen, the US invasion of Iraq. Putin will know that this is now unpredictable. And he is the master of tactics, and he will be waiting for the opportunity to take advantage of whatever takes place in the coming months.
Because as you mentioned, he might be trying to make lemonade out of lemons. He didn't issue a very strong condemnation, but as you say, he's lost an ally in Nicolas Maduro. He has lost Syria entirely, which was a very important military outpost for Russia. He is continuing to fight a war in Ukraine. Yes, he's making some battlefield grounds, but he is also losing an enormous amount of men and resources in this war, and he's becoming more and more dependent on China. And the Iranian regime, which you mentioned, is facing its biggest challenge in the last several years, with protests that have just turned deadly, and Iran provides a lot of the weaponry, particularly a lot of the drone technology, to Russia. So he is not in as strong a position as he tends to project, and he has now just lost another ally. But it struck me that his condemnation seemed a bit half-hearted, but perhaps that is the best he can deal with at the moment, considering the hand of cards that he's holding.
Yeah, I think that's right, Richard. And I think too, and we've discussed this in the hours now that have played out since this strike took place. There's another piece to this too, isn't there? And that is about the idea that powers around the world have the power to intervene in their regions, in what Russia would describe as its near abroad. And I think that we can't have this conversation without just indicating an interest in what might be being thought about in Beijing by President Xi, and what his ambitions for his region be, frankly, part of the world that in this century it will be the most important part of the world. How will he view actions like this by the United States, and what it will mean for him and one other player around the world with ambitions that are not in America's interest, Kim Jong-un of North Korea? How will he be seeing this, and what will he think this means for him? And again, this is a multi-layered, because you can imagine that in Pyongyang, in North Korea, they may be saying, let's be careful, because the United States isn't messing around. But alternatively, they may also be saying, well, you're allowed to intervene in places next door to you, because that's what America's doing, Peter.
Keir Simmons, our chief international correspondent, Richard Engel, our chief foreign correspondent. Gentlemen, stay with us right now. Again, I'm Peter Alexander, just after 6 o'clock on the East Coast, shortly after 7 a.m. in Venezuela. Those are pictures from earlier this morning. Before dawn, giant explosions, fiery explosions taking place in and around the capital city there. You can see the fire raining down on that city. The president, a short time ago, announcing that the United States has, in his words, successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, adding that Maduro has been, along with his wife, in the president's words, captured and flown out of the country. The president saying the operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. He says there are more details to come, saying there will be a news conference that he will address the country at roughly 11 o'clock this morning, 5 hours from now, from his Mar-a-Lago estate. Clearly, the major headline here, the dramatic news, is that Nicolas Maduro, after a months-long pressure campaign by President Trump and his administration, has now been taken out of that country. It remains unclear if this was a negotiated exit. We are told by Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who says he has spoken with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, that the explosions, the kinetic action, as he describes it, the military strikes there were done to protect the efforts on the ground to execute what the Republican senator says was an arrest warrant to pick up Maduro and ultimately his wife when they were taken out of the country. We have asked the White House and the Pentagon and frankly the Justice Department for any better details about where Maduro is right now. But that capture operation that we have now learned about better explains why there were low-flying helicopters hovering on the ground in and around Caracas in the early morning hours today. We have spoken to one of our colleagues, a journalist on the ground in Venezuela, who was effectively stunned into silence when she heard this news. You could almost see her shaking during a live conversation we had here earlier. Richard Engel, again, is our chief foreign correspondent. Richard, as you look at this new picture, a live picture at what is roughly 7 o'clock in the morning in Caracas, Venezuela, it is clear that the situation has now calmed down, at least as you can see from the sky here, though it's very unclear about the situation on the ground there right now, who in effect is filling that power vacuum. Marco Rubio, we are told, according to Mike Lee, again, the Republican senator from Utah, saying that there was no further action in Venezuela expected to take place today. So it appears that the strikes we saw overnight are, at least for now, the last ones. There were roughly 15,000 American troops, soldiers, and sailors who have been stationed in what the president has described as a massive armada off the coast there in the Caribbean, off the coast of Venezuela, as part of this pressure campaign. The president himself, only a matter of days ago, said that that basically Maduro's days were numbered. We know that he and Maduro, the president Maduro, had spoken about a month ago. No better indications whether he and Maduro had spoken more recently than that, or if there were some private negotiations taking place behind the scenes, as evidenced by this being a capture operation. It appears that that nothing would have been formalized if it still required his capture. Among the questions to be asked of the president a short time from now, we have heard on the ground from members of that narco-terrorist regime, as the White House describes it, what was formerly the Maduro regime, asking for proof of life of Maduro. Members of the military establishment there saying in effect that they were prepared to fight back with force if U.S. troops were on the ground in that country. No indication that the president has any plans to do such a thing. And then, of course, course, politically, there is a lot of the back and forth taking place, even if this early morning hour, about exactly what the president's mission was, the authority under which he was acting and doing this right now amid what has been a very broad criticism, frankly, some of it from Republicans as well, certainly from Democrats, about what have included a series of boat strikes in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, focused largely on what the U.S. alleges are drug boats bringing drugs to the United States. Our team is in the control room, keeping us honest on who we can speak to right now. Richard Engel has been joining us. Keir Simmons has been joining us as well. I want to get back to Courtney Kuby, who is covers the Pentagon for us and is an expert in all of these.
There's a Harbor Freight store in your neighborhood where we sell hard-working tools that always work.
Look good. In this case, bringing some of your favorite treats back and adding in some new ones as well. Some of the limited time lineup includes the 70th Stuff. It's a shortbread cookie with cookies and cream.
This was one of the things that we did to stop it on land. We had to do this in order to stop it on land. This was a part of it. There are other parts and there are other areas, frankly. But what they did is really amazing, and I think it sends a signal. We're not going to be pushed around as a country anymore by these countries where we want to be politically correct all the time. They're killing our people. If we had a war, if you lost 300,000 people, in the Civil War, we lost 600,000 people. We lose 300,000 people a year to drugs, and we're not going to allow it anymore with any country.
You said that you were prepared for a second wave, and I assume that you still are. But what does the future look like for the Maduro loyalists who are still in Caracas and I assume have not yet fled or been removed?
Well, if they stay loyal, the future is really bad. Really bad for them. If they convert, there's a conversion factor. I would say most of them have converted. He's had very little loyalty. In fact, I noticed that today that some people are marching on the street waving flags, and they're very in support. They have American flags being waved on the streets. So, I mean, I think he's got very little support. Look, he was a dictator that the people hated. So I don't see a lot of that. I don't think we're going to see a lot of that.
Well, will you, Mr. President, throw your support behind opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who, as you recall, won the Nobel Peace Prize and then in turn dedicated it to you for your efforts in pressuring Maduro? Are you going to fully support her to take over to run the country?
Well, we're going to have to look at it. Right now, they have a vice president, as you know. I mean, I don't know about what kind of an election that was, but, the election of Maduro was a disgrace, just like my election was a disgrace. 2020 was a disgrace, and, a real disgrace. Now, 2024 was too big to rig, but what he did was, his was open. I would say, frankly, you want to know the truth? I think Charlie would testify this. It wasn't a hell of a lot worse than what they did to us in 2020. It was our election was a disgrace in 2020, and everyone knows it. And now it's come out, and it's come out even in the legal form. But it was disgraceful. He had an election that was a rigged election, and the people have no love for him. That's for sure. He had very little loyalty, if any loyalty. He was a dictator who was a tough cookie, and he ran it tough, and the people can't believe they got so lucky.
Meet Francis. His story is so inspirational, we turned it into a book.
Immigrating from Nigeria to the U.S., reality hit him like a punch to the chest. Francis had no credit. How will I even make it in this city? The answer was Credit Karma. In time, he got his first credit card, eventually reached a credit score of 700.
They're going to get oil. We're going to allow people to have oil. But we can't take a chance after having done this incredible thing last night of letting somebody else take over where we have to do it again. We can do it again, too. Nobody can stop us. There's nobody that has the capability that we have. You know, when I watch that war in Russia going on and on and on and everybody dying, and it's like, it's primitive. It's primitive. It's horrible. It's really horrible.
Could you tell us, Mr. President, a little bit more? Because you're talking about the precision of this operation and the brave men and women. Was this Delta Force guys? Were this Navy SEALs? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, they're the most highly trained soldiers in the world. There's nobody that has their talent, because it's talent. It's not just bravery. It's bravery. You have to have the bravery, but it's talent. Nobody has talent like this, and nobody has equipment like we have. I mean, everything was pinpoint. They had everything. They practiced. They actually built a house which was identical to the one they went into, with all the safes and all the steel all over the place, and, you know, at the top of stairways and rooms.
It was Delta Force, sir?
I don't want to say, but I will say this. I'm having a news conference in just a little while, so therefore I'm going to have to get off this line pretty soon, but I'm having a news conference at 11, and we're going to be talking about it. And if they get elected, the other side, the people that we're talking about, if they get elected in our country, it will be Venezuela on steroids. Do you remember that? I used to say that all the time, Charlie, right?
Indeed.
We would have been Venezuela on steroids, meaning we would have been a bigger version of Venezuela. But the end result, we would have been a failed nation. Had they gotten elected, we would have been a failed nation. So I'll get ready for a news conference. And,
real quickly before we let you go, though, can you tell us where Maduro and his wife are right this second?
Well, they'll be heading to New York. You know, they were indicted in New York, and also...
So are they taken to a ship first, and then...
Yes, the Iwo Jima. They're on a ship.
Okay.
But they'll be heading into New York. The helicopters took them out, and they went by helicopter in a nice flight. I'm sure they loved it. But they've killed a lot of people. Remember that. They killed a lot of people. And
a lot of Americans.
Even people in their own country. They killed a lot of people to maintain power. He's a very vicious person.
Well, President Trump, I'm incredibly grateful to you for coming on this morning. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. We know that you've got a lot on your plate these days, but we're very appreciative, and we look forward to your press conference at 11.
Well, remember one thing, our country now, it's not because of this, but long before this, almost from the time I took office, it's gone so fast. Our country is hotter than it's ever been before. And we had a dead country a year and a half ago. We had a dead country. This country was dead with Biden and with that group of people. And if we had that group extended through Kamala, this country would have been dead. But we had a dead country.
Choose the borders are.
Well, now look at the border. We have nobody coming in through the border anymore. Look at that. So, you know, that's right. The border czar. She was our border czar. She would have been worse as a president than she was as a border czar. So, anyway, which is pretty bad. Have a good time. Thank you very much,
Thank you,
everybody.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlie.
Yes, sir.
Well, food starts with real ingredients. High-quality proteins and veggies that you can see. Nothing hidden, nothing unnecessary, just real food. Because when they eat well, you feel better too.
Shop our holiday tax vacation sale now through January 4th and save the sales tax on your purchase, plus 60 months 0% interest financing available to those who qualify.
The centerpiece of future family memories. Seating fit for a king or your next TV series binge. A cozy retreat for the perfect night's sleep. At Goods, we know whatever furniture you're looking for. It's not just meant to fill the room, but make the room. Because great spaces start at Goods.
With us, right? And everybody was after for 20 years, and we got him. We've done a lot, but this was something, maybe because it's fresh in our minds, you know, because, again, the Iranian situation was so big, knocking that out, and everything, the B-2 bomber, every single missile hit its target, and the target was an air shaft.
Right.
Dark at night. Think of that. Dark at night, no moon, you couldn't see a thing. And every missile went right through that air shaft and just obliterated the place. So that was amazing, and this was amazing.
I wonder, Mr. President, I want to ask you because from your Vice President, J.D. Vance, said that the message is pretty clear that drug trafficking must stop. So was this operation a message that you're sending to Mexico, to Claudia Sheinbaum, the president there?
Well, it wasn't meant to be, and we're very friendly with her. She's a good woman, but the cartels are running Mexico. She's not running Mexico. The cartels are running Mexico. And we could be politically correct and be nice and say, oh, yes, she is. No, she's very frightened of the cartels. They're running Mexico. And I've asked her numerous times, would you like us to take out the cartels? No, Mr. President. No, please. So we have to do something because we lost. The real number is 300,000 people, in my opinion. You know, they like to say 100,000. 100,000 is a lot of people, but the real number is 300,000 people, and we lost it to drugs, and they come in through the southern border, mostly the southern border. Plenty come in through Canada too, by the way, in case you don't know. But they come in through the southern border, and something's going to have to be done with Mexico.
Why did you decide to do this morning?
Are you talking about calling you people or the shot?
No, taking out.
I'm not sure which is worse. If you want to know, I'm calling you. I haven't spoken to anybody else because Charlie Hurd has been a great friend of mine for a long time. He was with me when it was not fashionable, and those are the people I like. He was with me, Charlie, when it was not at all fashionable. So that's the reason I'm doing this. And your show is great. You're doing a great job. What a good team.
But I meant, why did you make the decision to take out Maduro this morning? And what was Maduro doing when our guys came in on him?
So we were going to do this 4 days ago, but the weather was not perfect. The weather has to be perfect. And we had just the perfect weather. We had, very good. A little bit few more clouds than we thought, but it was good. We waited 4 days. We were going to do this 4 days ago, 3 days ago, 2 days ago. And then all of a sudden it opened up and we said go. And I'll tell you, it was just amazing. And what was he doing? He was in a very highly guarded, like a fortress, actually. He was in a fortress. You know, that we had nobody killed was amazing. I think we had nobody killed, I have to say, because a couple of guys were hit, but they came back and they're supposed to be in pretty good shape. But that we had nobody killed, that we lost no aircraft, everything came back. We got it all back. One of them was hit pretty hard, but a helicopter, but we got it back. But it just was the right time to do it. We had to do it because it's a war. We're losing 300,000 people a year. We don't lose that much in a war, okay, if you look. And we had to do it. But he was in a house that was more like a fortress than a house. It had steel doors. It had what they call a safety space, where it's, solid steel all around. He didn't get that space closed. He was trying to get into it, but he got bum rushed so fast that he didn't get into that. We were prepared. We had, massive blowtorches and everything else that you need to get through that steel, but we didn't need it. He didn't make it to that area of the house.
Mr. President, your war on narcoterrorism from our southern border and beyond clearly will save American lives. Moving forward for Venezuela, what do you think is next for the Venezuelan people now that you have removed Maduro so that he can face American justice?
Well, we're making that decision now. We can't take a chance on letting somebody else run and just take over where he left or left off. So we're making that decision now. We'll be involved in it very much. And we want to do liberty for the people. We want to, have a great relationship. I think the people of Venezuela are very, very happy because they love the United States. They were run by essentially a dictatorship or worse. It couldn't have been worse. It was a terrible thing that was taking place in Venezuela. But look, tremendous numbers of people were being killed through drugs. And what they did to our country in sending prisoners and people from mental institutions and drug lords and everything, they sent it by the hundreds of thousands of people into our country. And that is just unforgivable. That's why, he wanted to negotiate at the end, and I didn't want to negotiate. I said, nope, we got to do it. He was trying to negotiate at the end. You probably saw that. And trying hard to make a deal. And I said, this could have been a very foolish thing if it didn't work out. But I said, nope, we can't do it. What he did with drugs is bad. What he did with a lot of other things is bad. But what he did was sending hundreds of thousands of Tren de Aragua and drug dealers. And they emptied out their jails into our country. They emptied out, if you think about it, they emptied out all of their mental institutions into our country. What he did there, and every other thing,